So we've spent some time talking about lexiles and different ways in which texts are complex. The lexile formula is one form that's used for determining text complexity, but I want to take a minute to look deeply at Montana Stories of the Land. For this purpose, we're going to look at Chapter 3, From Dog Days to Horse Warriors, Montana's People, 1700 to 1820. The first thing I want you to notice is on page 42 and 43 of the textbook, you're going to see a beautiful graphic that includes a timeline overview of the period in question. This allows students to place this period within the broader context or chronology of the history, and the graphic is a very supportive tool for helping readers begin to build some background knowledge or connect what they already know to new information or new content. So pay attention to the timeline detail at the beginning of each and every one of these chapters. Next, the chapter provides a clear, compelling purpose for the reading of the chapter. And they basically frame it, read to find out. Who lived here 300 years ago and what their lives were like. How Europeans' arrival on the continent affected people already here. How horses and guns changed life dramatically. Real names of Montana's Indian tribes. So there's 4 different things that you can find out by reading this chapter. It creates an opportunity for students to make predictions about what they're going to learn and also to seek knowledge effectively and thoughtfully as they're working their way through the chapter. You're going to note that the chapter itself has a beautifully set text, and headings and subheadings are extremely clear as students work through the chapter. But there's one aspect that I wanted to talk about that is associated with Lexile scores. If you run a Lexile score on Montana's Stories of the Land, you need to know that that score is not accurate. It is not an accurate representation analytically of the complexity of this text. What Lexile does is use an algorithm that includes the number of letters or syllables, within a word, the number of words within a sentence, and it actually utilizes punctuation to determine levels of text complexity. This textbook has some of the most beautifully written parenthetical definitions for complex words that are built into each and every sentence. And they're very clear and very simple. So I'm going to look at page number 44 and have you take a look at some of these terms that are parenthetically defined within the context of the text. Let's look at European immigration changes life on this continent and the subsection. So when you come to the word immigration, students may be confused. They may not know what that word means. But then you're going to see in parentheses, moving to a new country. The simplest and most concise and crisp definition of that word built right into the sentence. This is an actual reading support that may make this chapter artificially have a higher Lexile score than it actually does. So I want you to be really clear about what lexiles tell us and what lexiles don't. In this particular instance, that parenthetical definition actually makes this text much more accessible to a much broader spectrum of readers. And so I want you to have an awareness of that. I utilize the subheadings to be able to identify and move students through the text. And those subheadings may actually be assigned to different individuals over time. The next feature of Montana Stories of the Land that I wanted you to pay attention to are the sidebar information within this text. Many textbooks have sidebar information that's not directly related to the content of the text. In those cases, the sidebar information ends up becoming a giant distraction. If the picture doesn't match what the text is saying, that's a distraction. If the graphics are busy, noisy, and loud, that's a distraction. If the text boxes that include additional materials aren't directly related to the narrative of the text, that is a distraction. In this particular instance, these are not distractions. They're actually additive information, and they're hooks that can engage students. I would like teachers, as they're addressing this particular book, to be looking at how the sidebar information might actually be presented as a mini investigation up front. Do a deep dive into the Hellgate Treaty. do a deep dive into the impact of smallpox on American Indian peoples in Montana and the actual primary source material that's presented in those sidebars, and then use the narrative of the chapter itself to correct for confusion. So take a look at the sidebars on page 44. Why are Indians called Indians? And then we have a bit of art that's actually being presented in the form of a winter count from the Lakota. And then we have a direct quote from a Cree chief back in 1787 that was collected by David Thompson in his narratives. And if you leaf through the book, you're going to see that each and every image or artifact that is being presented is directly connected to the tribes that are being talked about as you're working your way through the context of this text. So with that, I think we're looking at a textbook that's actually a very positive example. And at the very end of our course, we'll look at one that's a negative example in another content area.